Hello, this is another off-the-cuff demonstration for what I've been working on lately. So in the last video I was showing off the 3D engine and the little cube guy that I had and how he walked around and how he looked a bit robotic, and I didn't like it. And so I learned that the way that you can create more immersion to animations is by using, one of the techniques is inverse kinematics, and it's helpful if you have a whole physics engine for that. But I wasn't thinking of any of that back then. I was just thinking, well, I'm only one guy. Working in 3D is very time consuming. I probably should go to 2D for now. And so then I was like, oh, what if I write my own text editor? And what if I, instead of using Sean Barrett's library, STB truetype, what if I just learned how to read truetype files and then rasterize all that text by myself? And so to that end, I started working in Desmos, where, well, like Sean Barrett has he has a whole website where he demonstrates the concept behind rendering. Like this page, he demonstrates how to rasterize text. And so there's two different ways you can do it, where you go scan line by scan line, or like sub-scan line precision for anti-aliasing. And so I did that. And then I wanted to experiment with different methods of doing it. And so he has another way that he discusses where you do trapezoidal area to calculate the exact coverage of a pixel that the font lays on top of, that the text character or the glyph lays over. And so he goes through all the math and all the different examples. And so to wrap my head around it, I started using Desmos very heavily. And so if you imagine this curve is like the top curve of a glyph, like maybe A, for example, and it's on the grid, it's like a single scan line where a single grid is like 1 pixel in the big frame buffer. And so I just made a little example where we step over every single pixel and calculate the coverage that the glyph has with it. And by doing that, I was able to create my own font atlas, basically. Let me compile that and boot up the project. And so you can see that we have a font atlas here, and I started getting curious, like what if I start unpacking other characters, for example, like this little gear icon, or I think it's called the sun icon. And it works with multiple fonts. I also downloaded a Tibetan font, but just out of the nature of how I unpack it, I just specified I only want the English characters, except for this one up here. So my system, my font rasterizer that I wrote from scratch, works with multiple different fonts. That's what I'm trying to get at. And so originally I was just curious in writing a text editor like this. It's a text editor, because I was getting kind of sick of VS Code. And then I realized, well, like, I don't want to spend the next year working on my own text editor when VS Code exists. So I just want to jump into what I really care about, which is learning inverse kinematics. And so to that end, I started working with physics and different collisions. And so I can play older videos right here where like I'm colliding two capsules together, but the collision resolution was wrong, and so they get stuck into each other. And then I fixed it, and then they like smoothly bounce off each other, like snap to different positions based on where they are. That's like positional based dynamics. It's not full PBD, full positional based dynamics. It's just a little demonstration. And so that, I didn't know how I could scale that up quite well. And so then I started reading Box 2D, and I transcribed the Box 2D Lite library to my own data-oriented format. And I was struggling so very hard with getting the impulse solver correct, where I started writing all these different tests where just learning basic geometric intuition, like the separating axis theorem, where you're detecting the exact intersection between two bodies. And then I wrote it for like circle versus line, circle versus circle, and the different anchor points. All this tons of stuff just to gain the geometric intuition I needed. And so then I started working with the impulse solver, where you have this little circle right here intersecting with this line, and the positional resolution, I draw like a little faint ghost of where it should end up. But what I was really stuck on was the equation for determining impulse, because the velocity of this circle is, the relative velocity between this line and the circle is a certain value. And the whole idea behind impulse solvers is that when you're traveling into another object, you want to calculate the velocity to prevent any deeper interpenetration. So if this circle is moving at, for example, if I can find it, I'm going to need to scroll around quite a bit. So we're moving at -3, let's say like it's meters per second. So -3.6 meters per second. So in the collision, if we have a full restitution where like it's perfectly bouncy, then we would have a velocity pointing back this other way in the opposite direction of, if I can find the actual equation for it, 6.33, which is, 3.6 times 2. So it's perfectly bouncy going in this other direction. That's just the impulse solver equation. We can substitute any restitution for it. I think I made a slider for it right here so you can see how the value changes. Like if there's no restitution where it just rests perfectly on the line, then the velocity is 3.16, or I think that's also the bias term I worked in there. So that's all just part of Box 2D. I'm rambling right now. But what I have so far is just I had a bunch of other shapes. Like I have axis aligned bounding boxes, I had oriented bounding boxes, I had triangles. But right now I just reduced it to get the bare minimum working. I just have a circle that's able to collide with lines and move around, and an impulse solver. And so once that started working, I added the capsule, and that's when it started getting confusing, because depending on the order in which I solved the different bodies traveling to each other and subtracting the velocity, I sometimes do it wrong. Usually with the capsule, or when it collides with the circle, they kind of explode. And so I need to debug this. And so to that end, I started writing a little, it's all software rendered, by the way. So I started writing a software rendered immediate mode graphical user interface. Like I am GUI, but I wrote it myself, and it's software rendered. So I don't have the whole thing plugged in yet. Like right now, all I have is like what was the last entity I clicked, so that eventually I could like click on a certain entity on a certain frame and go like, okay, what's its velocity, what's its position, like what is it colliding with, and then I added these little buttons to the GUI that I can click through, and this will represent the snapshot system. I haven't plugged that in yet. I was just working on the GUI system all of yesterday, and so the next few days I'll be working on snapshotting like every single frame and then playing that back, and so I can step through it with this little window that I created. So it's all software rendered. I don't want to go through Vulkan like I was with the last project. Well, not right now, because I have this little performance measure at the bottom, and like let's say I go full screen, and so even then, like we're still in the green. We're still not running nearly as slow enough where we would need to start using the graphics card. So it's all software rendered. We're just calculating the color of every single pixel programmatically on the CPU. And I added a bunch of other stuff like, what if I do bilinear blending and figuring out like how to rotate text. So just a bunch of possibly useless features that I was experimenting with. But this will eventually become the foundation of the video game engine that I'm building, where it's minimal dependency. I'm not using any other libraries aside from my own code. Like, of course, I depend on the Win32 runtime, and I haven't pulled out the C runtime library yet. Like, I'm still using printf, for example. But eventually, I'll be able to pull all that stuff out, and it'll be my own game engine that I can work with going into the future. But to that end, I'm figuring out impulse physics, which will be the foundation for the inverse kinematics that I wanted to learn next. So, where I chain together a bunch of capsules that represent a little humanoid. But I'm not there yet. Of course, I'll post more updates, but this is just a little example of what I've been working on since September and what I will continue working on in at least the next year. So that's all for now. I probably forgot like a bunch of, like half the stuff that I've written into this. Like I'm just forgetting all about it, but that's all I can think of. So thanks for watching. See you later.